Welcome to this video on controls and countermeasures. On the CISSP exam, you will be asked question in regards to safeguards and countermeasures, and specifically what type of safeguards and countermeasure you should select for various situations. So let's talk about these countermeasures throughout this video. Now, if you recall from the previous video, the purpose of a security control is either to administratively, physically or technically provide some kind of safeguard or countermeasures. So our goal there is to reduce or manage security risk by applying security controls, and the outcome of those controls depend on the cost. And for the exam, one of the rule of thumb is to know that the control you select should cost less than benefit or the asset value. Meaning, if we have $10,000 web server that we are trying to protect, we do not want to spend $20,000 to protect it. Then we could just pay another $10,000 to replace it. So the idea would be we would want to spend about, I don't know, $5,000 to protect 8 $10,000 server and so on. Now there is a lot more than goes into the equation, but that is the gist of it. We want to spend less than the benefit and the asset value. The benefit has to do with what problem is it solving as it pertains to the organization. So when we are implementing controls, we don't want to just pick control for the sake of doing so. We want them to solve a problem, and for whichever control we select, security is our overall focus. The controls, whatever they might be, should provide consistent protection, reduce risk, and be compliant with governance throughout the organization. And that's going to apply to user, that's going to apply to system components, that's going to apply to services, protocols, whatever it is that we are targeting for protection to reduce risk. That is what we need to consider, because the overall goal is to enable the business to perform its mission or perform its function, and security should be designed with that in mind. And that's where defense in depth comes in, where we look at the asset, whatever they might be, function, processes, components, personnel, whatever we deem to be valuable. We then want to apply administrative controls. These are also called soft controls or process controls. These are procedure, processes, things like that. Then we also want to take a look at technical and logical control, how we can technically and logically protect that asset. Then lastly, we focus on physical controls. How do we physically protect the assets? And within this group, administrative, technical, logical and physical, you can combine them with different controls that have a different purposes and objective, and that will create an effective defense in depth. For example, we can apply a deterrent control, which is where we want to discourage unauthorized action. We can apply a preventive control where we want to stop or prevent unauthorized action. So we can apply detective control to discover unauthorized action, or a corrective control where we correct or modify unauthorized actions. We can also select something like compensating control to support other controls. We can select a directive control which will direct compliance with a security policy, and then we have a recovery control, which is where we recover from an event. And as it just went through those definitions, maybe something came to mind. Maybe you saw something in the field, maybe you saw something throughout the studies that might make you think, was that preventive control, was that detective control, or was the directive control? And when we combine all of this together, you will find that there are a lot of things that were overlapped together. For example, let's just take a simple security policy. Well, a security policy could be administrative for the most part. It can prevent, it can deter, and it can also direct. How can it do that? The security policy is written from the perspective of these are all the rules within the organization. These are the rules you are expected to follow. This is what make us compliant. This is the regulation, whatever it might be. Within the policy, there are probably a section says that those who violate the policy shall be punished this way. You will be reprimanded maybe you will be terminated from your position, maybe you will be arrested, right? That is the aim, to deter you from violating the policy. On the other hand, there might be a section inside the policy that says, if you violate this policy, here what you should do to respond to that. That might be directive. It could also be corrective as well, right? So this control will span across lot of different rules. So let me walk you through a simple example so you can see what I mean, and let's look at the different control that we can apply to just a single web server. Let's say this web server is installed in an equipment rack within a data center. First of all, we could want to put a deterrent sign on the data center door. That would be physical deterrent control. We would want to sign on the door saying, this is data center, unauthorized access will be detected, and intruders will be escorted off the premises. Whatever you want to put on that door sign. But you would want to put a sign there saying this is a restricted area, this is a data center, unauthorized access is not permitted. So now if you are looking at that and you know you are not supposed to be in that room, the normal person would not want to go in to the room or try to. It would deter them from trying to go further. Meaning it is not the snack bar. This is not a restroom. This is the data center, right? Now, what if they were open to the door? Now, you would want to alarm system that would detect unauthorized entry. Meaning they did not put their badge in. They did not enter a PIN number. So, the alarm system would sense that, detect that, and then send a notification to the security guard, who would then come down and try to correct the problem. So your security guard would be your physical corrective control. Those are your physical control as they would apply to the web server. Now, what about on the technical side of things? When you go to log into the web server, you would have a warning banner, and that warning banner would say, this is an authorized system, only authorized users are allowed to access this. Violator will be prosecuted, blah blah blah, right? And that context, again, the normal person would be deterred from trying to log in. However, if they do to try login, a technical preventive control would be identity and access management, or identification or authentication. You are going to claim to be somebody, but we want to authenticate that you are who say you are. So our identity and access management would prevent you from accessing the web server if you were not authorized to do so. Then what if an intruder guessed your username and guessed your password or knew them ahead of time? Now we implement multi-factor authentication, which would compensate for the weakness in the identity and access management. So now you have technical deterrent, technical preventive, and technical compensating control all built into the website. Those are your technical controls. Then the administrative level, maybe we want to detect how many people are trying to get into the web server every single day, or what are people doing on the web server. Maybe we want to try to detect violation. That would be our administrative detective control, which would be audit log, and that can also be considered as a technical detective control. But audit log review is mainly an administrative process, so let's call it an administrative detective control for these purposes. Then we would have an administrative preventive control, which means we would have a configuration standard of how that web services configure to capture audit log, to implement our multi-factor authentication, to implement our identity and access management, to configure our warning banners. So now you see how all this working together. And then lastly, we have an administrative corrective control, which would be an employee reprimand. Let's say during our audit log review, we found some issue, somebody was misusing the server, and now we go through the audit log, we figure out what they have done, we put together real simple incident response case, and then we bring the employee in and we correct the problem. Those are our administrative controls. So now just through that simple example, you can see how effective defense and depth can be, and also that you are probably already doing this in the field at work. Whatever, you are already probably doing this, you just don't see it the way that it is listed here. So the idea is again to go through the deterrent, preventive, detective, corrective, compensating, directive and recovery controls and figure out exactly what going on to apply to meet our organization objectives. So the bottom line for this video is to understand the purpose of all the different controls that we talk about, know the different control categories, administrative, technical and physical, and also know the intent of the different control type just in case you get question about them on the exam.